Principle 5 refers to big diversity of different life forms of organisms and ecosystems in the ocean. As I said, one of the main characteristics of the ocean is that it contains water, and this water is the one that enables all of this diversity, from single cell organisms to complex large mammals. Great diversity. When you look at the land from above, you actually notice that it's really basically a thin layer where life is possible. So you have, like, from land, a little bit of life in the ground. Then you have life developing on surface up to the top of vegetation, let's say, if there is vegetation. And that's it, a little bit of birds above, but they're all connected with terrestrial areas. But when you come to the ocean, this living space is so large, so big, so connected, and that is why it enables also this great diversity of organisms and ecosystems. So average depth of the ocean is about 3.5 kilometers. And the deepest point of the ocean is so-called Challenger Deep, which is situated in the Mariana Trench, and it's approximately 11,000 meters, 11 kilometers. So when you look on the land, it's uncomparable. This space with this vastness of the ocean, it's really three-dimensional, and you can go in so many different directions. And here you can actually get a grip, like get a vision of all of this vast space where organisms can actually move and live, and they can be in the water column, they can be on the seafloor, in the seafloor. And because of these differences in characteristics of seawater, and all of these differences actually make possible this huge diversity that we have in the ocean. So the life in the ocean, it ranges from the tiniest microbes, viruses and microbes, to largest organisms that live on Earth, such as the blue whale. On land, the biggest animal in terrestrial environment and terrestrial ecosystems is an elephant. Here on this picture, you can see the comparison between the size of an elephant and the blue whale. So because of the features of seawater, because of its density, that is what provides opportunity for development of such big animals such as the blue whale. So you have all kinds of different organisms and ecosystems developing in the ocean. One of the major groups of organisms and most important organisms in the ocean are microbes, and microbes that produce oxygen. And these are cyanobacteria and phytoplankton, single-cell phytoplankton organisms. They're very abundant. There's a huge biomass of these organisms in the ocean, and they are at the bottom of almost all ocean food webs. As plants on land are at the baseline of terrestrial food webs and food chains, phytoplankton and cyanobacteria are at the baseline of marine food webs. And if you look at the examples of food webs, which is the topic that is being taught in schools, in our case, in Croatia, until recently, whenever you would have this topic, the picture that would represent the relationships in the food chain and in the food web, it would always be terrestrial example. So recently there has been a shift, and now in the books, in the textbooks, we have examples of marine food webs. And this is really something important because it gives students and teachers an idea of how ocean functions, but on the other hand, how terrestrial and marine and freshwater ecosystems are also connected through these interactions of feeding and through the food webs. So what makes these phytoplankton organisms special is their superpower that they, through the process of photosynthesis, produce food and produce oxygen. So they produce carbohydrates, and this is the basic food, let's say, that is firstly being produced in the food chain and then in the food web. So they are primary producers. Because we have such huge biomass and presence of primary producers, and they serve as a baseline of food web, a lot of animal organisms could be developed because at some stage of their life they could feed on the phytoplankton. Uh, most of major groups that are present and exist on Earth can be found only in the ocean, such as echinoderms. So you have like urchins and sea stars and holoturians and tunicates and sea sponges. So these are all organisms that are really specific and can be found in different places. Different species can be found in different parts of the ocean. Because of that complexity of vastness of the ocean and water masses that are different in salinity, in density, in temperature, this diversity of features of the water and differences in the everything okay? Continue.
Okay.
This was not Thanos's warning. I have more time. This all enables the development and diversity of different organisms that are being adapted to these different environmental conditions. So water, the ocean is not same in all of its parts. So in the surface layer there is much more light than in the deep. Then different conditions are in the coastline or in the intertidal zone than in the open water or the deep ocean, and so on. So all of these differences made specific organisms to adapt to certain environments. Not all organisms live everywhere, as they don't on land. They don't do that in the sea as well. So because of these specific adaptations, in the sea, we can find so many specific and unique examples of life cycles of organisms, of its adaptations, of different kinds of relationships. So usually when we talk about symbiosis, I think most of teachers, when they talk about this, they mention the symbiosis between I'm missing the English words now. The crab and the anemone. But this is just one typical example. But there's so many different examples of symbiosis, like the corals. So corals are animals, and corals live in a symbiotic relationship with specific type of algae that live inside them. So how do they live together? Why do they live together? So the coral and the polyp of a coral provides a shelter for these algae so nobody else can eat them. And on the other hand, these tiny algae that live in the coral, they provide, as their algae, they photosynthesize and they produce carbohydrates, and then they produce food for the corals. And they function perfectly, and this is really a positive example of symbiosis where both organisms have a positive impact from each other. I'm sure you all have seen the cartoon Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo is, I'm sure you have also all seen this or remember this scene, where bioluminescence is a topic in this part of the cartoon, where you have the ocean, organisms that live in the deep ocean where there is no light. The organisms have specific adaptations to this darkness, and they have developed organs that produce light. This is something very unique as well. There are some examples of terrestrial organisms, like some fungi, that produce, they have the that can be bioluminescent, but most of the bioluminescent organisms live in the deep ocean. Then let's say phytoplankton. Phytoplankton, so these tiny organisms that photosynthesize, they need to be on the surface, on the close to the surface to have more light. So in order to be closer to the surface, they in many species have a little oil droplets in them. So oil floats on water, and this is why phytoplankton organisms float on the surface layers, in the surface layers of the ocean. These tiny oil droplets are actually omega-3 fatty acids. We know how these acids are really healthy for humans, and why we need to eat small pelagic fish to get that component for our health. But the small pelagic fish like sardines, they don't produce omega-3 fatty acids. They feed on phytoplankton, and then they accumulate this in their tissues, and then we accumulate that in our tissues when we eat small pelagic fish such as sardines. So these are really important things, important adaptations, which in some way also have impact on us as users of marine environment as well. There are also examples of very complex life cycles. I'm sure you also all know examples of eel and salmon, which move from rivers to the seas and from seas to the rivers for the reproduction. And this also is an example of connection between freshwater and ocean ecosystems and habitats. But I'm not sure if you know how jellyfish lives. Some organisms also change during their life cycle between water column. So you know that jellyfish is floating, it's a part of the plankton, and it floats in the seawater. But that is adult stage of the jellyfish. When jellyfish in certain phase of reproduction cycle, it is stuck to the bottom, and then it's a part of benthic communities. It's the organisms that live on the seafloor. So it's some organisms have this very big differences during their life duration, whether as they're as a larva or adults. They really have different types of life.
3 minutes, Mel.
Okay, I'm almost there. So what connects most and all basically organisms, whether they're phytoplankton, zooplankton, large fish, sea mammals, it is the food webs. It is the relationship between organisms, uh, as the feeding as a relationship between organisms. And the feeding is, why do people eat, and why do all organisms living organisms eat? They need energy, and this energy transfer is something that through the food web is something that connects all organisms, not only in marine environment, but also it is a connection between marine and land environment, between marine and freshwater, between freshwater and land. So this is something to keep in mind, that these ecosystems are not disconnected. They're all connected through the transfer of food, of energy, of nutrients, of oxygen, and so on. Yolanda mentioned a little bit ocean acidification. We have this huge diversity of organisms that, and big number of organisms that use carbon that use carbonate to form their shells, like corals, like seashells, like snails, and so on. Um, because of high concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it also increases in the water, in the sea. And different chemical reactions that happened lead to the problem where these organisms, they don't have material to form their shells, and this is the problem which then impacts not only them but also all ecosystems, because as I just mentioned, all organisms are connected with each other with the through the feeding relationship. Um, in the water column, there are huge differences between diversity and community structures. So in the first layers, you have a zone, the surface zone, where you have a lot of sunlight, and this is the area of the sea which is most abundant, where there's most of life, because there's photosynthesis going on there, and because there's big primary production happening there. So a lot of organisms are there. As you go deeper, there is less light and there is less organisms, but still, even in the deepest parts of the ocean, there is life, and a lot of life and a lot of diversity. Um,
Less than a minute.
okay, I will just skip this, and I wanted to go to the hydrothermal vents. Um, so this is something very specific in the nature that we know. Until 40 years ago, um, it wasn't people didn't know that life does exist if there is no sun. And in the deep ocean, in the hydrothermal vents, these are places where the tectonic plates get together. There are places where there's diversity of life because of, now I don't have too much time to explain, but just to know that in the deep ocean there are places where there's a big biomass of organisms, a lot of organisms that live there, and they're really complex and ecosystems that exist without any connection to the surface and to the photosynthetic processes and to the sunlight. Also, in the intertidal zone, the zone between high tide and low tide, there's a zonation of organisms. And next time you go to the beach, you can take a look. And you can actually see how organisms are very nicely layered. And this vertical distribution is mainly because regulated by the sea level and the impact of waves. And this intertidal zone is very, very stressful because of dryness, because of high temperatures, because you have exchanges of high tide and low tide, impact of waves, and so on. So organisms here really need to be very adapted, have specific adaptations to survive in this stressful habitat. And the last thing is just to mention estuaries, which also are part ecosystems where there's great diversity of organisms because of the input of nutrients, which is good for the phytoplankton, and then you have a big primary production and all the organisms that follow that. So I won't go too much into details. I just wanted to share some activities about differences of ecosystems which are based on photosynthesis and chemosynthesis, hydrothermal vents, and kids very, very positively react to discovering that such amazing and unusual life actually exists down deep in the ocean. Yeah, okay, that's it. And just before I leave, the last thing that is strongly related to this importance of preserving and keeping this great diversity of organisms and ecosystems is that all the things that we do as society, all the economic activities, all the equalities, all the societal and economic activities that people work on are very, very dependent on natural resources and stability of natural ecosystems. And if the baseline, which are natural resources, is stable, then everything else can be built up on that. If the ocean, because it covers 2/3 of the planet, is in trouble, and if natural resources of the ocean are in trouble, then all other societal and economic activities that people do will be endangered. And that's why it's very necessary to preserve and keep those ecosystems and resources stable, so that we now and the future generations can actually continue to develop in different aspects. So I will stop now. Thank you.